Hi, I'm Marcia Lehman, and I'm a Knox County Master Gardener. Today's topic is how to collect and submit a soil sample for testing. We get a lot of questions about this. The Extension Office gets a lot of questions about this. So we've put together this presentation, which is part PowerPoint and part video. So bear with me as I jump back and forth between PowerPoint and video. But how to collect a soil sample for testing. First, our test results are only as good as the methods that we use and the test that we use. So you can go into a lawn and garden store and buy a small test kit, and it's going to use a very, very, very small sample of soil. And can you really trust that that small sample is representative of what is going on in your lawn or garden or whatever area you're testing? Those tests may be good for pH, but they're really not particularly good for telling you what you need in the way of fertilizer or other amendments. So we recommend that you collect a soil sample and send it off to the UT lab in Nashville. Second point is you can test any time of year, but don't wait until you're ready to plant and say, oh yes, I need to go get a soil sample tested, because you want to plan ahead, get the soil tested, get the report, make amendments, improve the soil, and that takes a couple of months really for the soil to be improved enough and ready to put in the plants that you're planning to put in that area. So this is one place where planning ahead really helps. The biggest question that you have and that people often ask us, and it's not one that we can really answer for you, but we can help you decide what your answer will be. And that is, how many soil samples do you need? So the first question to ask yourself is, wherever you're thinking about planting things, whether it's your entire home lot or you have acreage, is the soil the same across that entire lot, across that entire plot? If it is all the same, then one sample will suffice. If it varies significantly, especially if you're in a subdivision, if the side lawn is different than the back lawn is different from the front lawn, just in the way that your grass is growing, for instance, then you may want to collect a sample from each of those areas. So if it's all the same, one sample will do, but if you have significant variations, then you need to consider doing multiple samples. It also depends on what's been going on. So what's the history of this property? If it's new to you, do you know what it was before? If you've lived there a while, are you in the process of converting lawn to garden, where the lawn was regularly fertilized, maybe regularly limed? You would want to know what the condition of that is if you're thinking of converting lawn to garden. Similarly, if you had some trees that used to provide a lot of shade and now they've gotten older or diseased, or you just want more sunlight on your property and you've taken them out, you probably want to test that area, because trees getting the size that they do will have probably consumed a lot of the nutrients in the soil. And a third example is if you've had recent construction where they removed soil or they brought soil in, then you definitely have probably a significant variation and you probably want to get that tested. You also need to ask yourself, what are you growing now? And more importantly, what are you planning to grow? So if you are thinking of putting in some shrubs like rhododendrons or azaleas, which are acid loving, you definitely will want to get the soil tested so you know what the starting pH is. And the test report, when you tell them that you want to grow acid loving plants, will tell you how to change the pH to get it to the area that those plants will like it and that they will thrive. So what you're planning to grow will also influence how many soil samples you want to take. And then probably the catch-all category is if you have an area that has been a consistent problem area. Doesn't matter what you put in there, acid loving, non-acid loving, vegetables, flowers. If you just have an area that things don't want to grow, pull a sample from that specific area and have it tested, and that will help you figure out what's going on there and if in fact you will ever be able to grow anything there. So bottom line is you get to decide how many soil samples you are going to submit for testing based on what you're planning to do with the property. Okay, so we're going to switch over to a short video on how to actually go out and collect a soil sample. I'll be right back after the video.
And since I'm shooting this alone, I have all these little props out here to mark my spot. So for starters, you will need a shovel. I like to use a trenching shovel because it has this really long blade. If you don't have a trenching shovel, you can use a standard shovel, but this is going to be a little bit harder. And you're going to dig a bigger hole in trying to collect your sample. And you'll see shortly what I mean. If you can see the green tape or the blue tape here on this shovel, that mark is 7 inches from the bottom of the tape, 8 inches from the top. Now, why did I do that? Well, because we want to collect our soil sample down about 6 inches. Now, as I collect the rest of my tools, here's the problem. My standard trowel, this is 4 inches, maybe to the top of here is 6 inches. But I defy any of you to go down, to be able to go down and get the soil that is at the bottom tip of that trowel. It will come in handy, but it's not your primary digging tool. Your other option is if you have a soil knife, and to here is 6 inches, to the hilt of the handle is 7, and that's still not quite long enough to go down and get what is at the bottom, because we want to get our soil sample at least 4 inches down, but better is to get down about 6 inches. So, if you remember your geometry, if I go straight down, that would be 7 inches. But if I go down at a slight angle, then that is really only 6 inches. So that's why I've got the tape mark on here between 7 and 8 inches, because that's how far down I want to go at an angle, pull it forward, and then I'll use one of my handy tools to scoop up what is at the bottom. So I'm only going to do this once, maybe twice. In an area where you're collecting a sample, you may want to do about 10 collections, depending on how big the area is. What you need is 1 cup of soil dry. It's obviously going to be wet when you collect it, so collect a little bit more than a cup. Make sure you've got at least a cup. Also, make sure that all your tools are clean. Even though I cleaned my tools before I put them away, when I got these out today, I gave them an extra cleaning because a couple of them have been sitting for a while collecting dust. And if you have been using a trowel to apply fertilizer and you have any residue on it, it will impact the results of your soil report, your soil test report. So you don't want to do that. So this is about where I'm going to be digging. This is my clean container into which I'm going to put my soil sample. And you'll notice I dated it January 15th and side because I'm in my side yard. If you're collecting samples from multiple spaces, definitely label the container, the clean container that you're putting the stuff in, the soil in, because I assure you by the time you get back in the house, you'll forget which one is which. So label it when you're out here. So let's start. Let me come up. And I'm going to, I said go down at an angle. And in this area, yep, I hit a rock. That's not at all surprising for this section of my lawn, because over the summer, this had a great big pile of soil on it from our construction project. So guess I'll go forward because there we go. That's a little better. So there I'm down 8 inches at an angle. So I'm going to pry it a little bit this way and then pry it a little bit this way. Come down on my knees. I'm going to use my soil knife because it's longer. And from the bottom of that hole, I'm going to take a little plug of soil and add it to my container. I also got new clean gloves out for this today. So then I would come to another area, maybe not this close, but I need to stay on camera. I'll pry it this way, pry it that way, pull my shovel out, come down at the bottom, and pull up another plug of soil. And as I say, you're probably going to need to do that 10 times or so to get a good cup of soil. And when you're done, if you happen to have picked up any little stones, take those out. They don't help the soil sample test at all. If you happen to pick up any of the thatch, if you're digging in a lawn area, pull that out. Any grass clippings, any straw, any weed residue, all you really want is soil. So we would collect about a cup of that, and then we're going to take it inside and let it dry. How do we do that? Okay, do not put it in the microwave. Do not put it in the oven. Just put it on a white paper plate or take a piece of the brown Amazon packing paper, shipping paper, lay it out someplace where the cat or the pets won't get into and the children won't get into it. And it'll probably take, depending on just how wet it is when you collect it, 3 or 4 days for our heavy clay soil to dry out. If it's in a really wet spot, it may take a week. And then when it is dried out, you'll fill out your paperwork and get ready to send it in. And that's what we'll talk about next. Okay, so we would do this 10 or 12 times to get about a cup of soil in a clean container. So let me reemphasize, clean all the tools before you start. You want no residue on it because that will impact the chemical tests that they will be doing in the labs. Get more than a cup because as it dries, it will get a little bit smaller. And then we'll talk about what to do with it when you're ready to send it in.
Okay, so I'm back from the video of actually collecting a sample, and that is probably the part that most people find the easy part. People seem to be really confused about how to prepare the paperwork that goes along with your soil sample when you submit it to the lab. And to help you get over that hurdle, I'm actually going to go out to the website, show you the forms, talk through the forms, show you how to fill out the forms, and then we'll come back and do a short wrap-up. Be back soon. Okay, so here I am on the web, and I usually get here by Googling Soil Plant and Pest Center. You'll see the URL up here as soillab.tennessee.edu. And yes, we are still open and processing samples during COVID. And here it says, please note that during COVID, you do not need a soil box. Please fill a sturdy quart plastic bag, think Ziploc plastic bag, and write your name on it. And that probably has to do with sanitizing the incoming materials. So it's easier to sanitize a plastic bag than it is a little cardboard box. But we're going to scroll down the page here. And there's 2 things that we are really interested in. The first thing you want to do is to come over here to the online marketplace where it says pay online here. I'm not going to walk through all this, but I would strongly recommend that you go here, create an account, and based on how many soil samples you've taken, set up and pay for those. So if you're getting a basic test, it's $15. If you have 2 samples, you'll put in that you're ordering 2 samples. The point to all this is that in this process, you've set up an account, a user ID and a password, and you will get an order number. And for now, I'm going to assume that that order number is 12345. So go in, make your payment, come back out, then come over here to soil analysis. And there's lots of other reference materials on this page having to do with soil analysis and soil fertility. Come over here, and we want this second one, the soil submission sheet. That's the form that we fill out. So let me pull this up. It is a fillable PDF. So whatever you type here will be entered, and then you can print it, you can save it. I strongly encourage you to do that. And the first thing I would do is, if you did the online payment and you got an order number, come in here and put your order number on this form. So whatever order number you got when you made payment, put it on this form. Then come over here and fill in your name, your address. I'm going to assume you're in Knoxville, and that might be 37900. You are in Knox County, and this is important because they track soil samples and things that they're seeing by county. If you're in Knoxville, you have an 865 number, and you will make your email your name at gmail.com. So fill that out. Now notice, here is the mailing address. I'll remind you of that later. This is the URL to get into this page that we all started at. So it's another reason that I encourage you to print this form when you're done, because if you can't remember where you went, or you can always pick it up and type in soillab.tennessee.edu. So in the sample that I collected in the video, you'll notice that my container was labeled side. So I'm going to call my sample side. And what are the things that I think I'm going to be growing here? Well, I'm going to use L for lawn. You'll notice on this page, there are many codes. And I have cool season grass, fescue, so that's an L. If you've got the warm season grass like Bermuda, that would be LB. I want to grow some vegetables. And the basic code for vegetables, I always want to put in a V, but it's actually G for garden. And despite the fact of just saying general vegetable garden, the recommendations that come back will tell you what to do for sweet corn, for tomatoes, for peppers, for greens like collards and kale, and for vine crops. So that one little letter code, G, gets you a couple of paragraphs of recommendations. Okay, then on this side lawn, I want to grow some perennial flowers. So I'll use FP, whoops, be sure to type correctly, some annuals, FA, and I want the basic nutrient test, which lists here everything that is included in that. So it's the primary macronutrients except nitrogen. So phosphorus, potassium, and then the calcium and magnesium are secondary, and then some of the micronutrients, which our clay soil rarely lacks in micronutrients. Some folks wonder if they should do the organic matter, and my response would be, if you've been growing organically for several years, then at some point, yes, do that. But if this is your first test and you have not been using organic practices, I probably would not spend the extra $15. So let's assume I have a second sample, which is why when I said when you're making your payment, if you've got two samples, you'd be paying $30. You only watched me demonstrate collecting part of the first sample, but let's assume you picked a second sample from your backyard. And so I'm going to call it back. You get to make up these names, and I would suggest you pick something that is short but descriptive, so that when the report comes back, and it says, here's the results for your sample back, you remember, oh yes, that's the backyard. So in the backyard, I want to grow some ornamental shade trees. That is ORST. I also want to try my hand at some non-acid loving shrubs. So that is ORNAS, shrubs. We have acid loving and non-acid loving. And then I want to do some berries in my backyard. And notice berries say, please see crop code sheet. That happens to be on the second page. The most important thing I can tell you about this second page is be sure to use the codes in the column under home. So if you're over here in fruits and nuts, pick up the home codes, which almost all start H underscore, as opposed to the ones under commercial code. Now, why am I beating this point? The reason is that if you pick up a commercial code here, or you come over here to commercial vegetables and say, oh man, I really want to grow okra and I want a specific recommendation for okra, and you use this code for okra rather than the G code on the first page, all of the recommendations will come back in how many pounds of fertilizer to add per acre, which then means you have to do a whole lot more arithmetic. When you use the home codes or these codes on the first page, your recommendations come back in how much to add per 100 square feet for things like flowers, and in 1,000 square feet if you're talking about the garden. So let's assume I'm going to try strawberries and blueberries in my backyard. And so blueberries are H underscore BB and strawberries are H underscore SB. That guarantees I get the recommendations in the in something other than acres. So SB and H underscore BB, $15. There I am. I am done. So just then I would print this form. I would also save a PDF copy of this form, and the printed one, I'll show you what to do with it next, but you want it to go in along with your sample because this form is the only place that they get these plant codes. And without these plant codes, they can't give you the very specific recommendations. So that's it on the paperwork. Let me stop and we'll go back and finish the PowerPoint. Okay, so after you have collected your sample, you got it all nice and dry, you put it in a Ziploc bag, and you have filled out your paperwork. Now you make sure that you write your name, the order number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that you got by setting up your account and paying online, and the sample ID. And I used the first sample, which was labeled side. Then take a copy of your paperwork. Since that was a fillable PDF and you printed a copy, either print a second copy or make a photocopy of it, but put a copy of your paperwork with the Ziploc bag, not inside the Ziploc bag, but on the outside, tape it to it, staple it to it, and then put it in a bubble wrap envelope and mail it off to the lab mailing address that is actually on the top of that form in Nashville, Tennessee. By giving them all your information in advance, you'll get back an electronic copy, a PDF copy of your soil test report the same day that they finish testing it. You'll get a copy in the mail several days later. The report that comes back to you will be specific to the sample or samples if you sent more than one, and the plant codes that you specified. So for instance, if you specified lawn, you actually get a rather detailed report of what you should do for your lawn, and they'll give you a low maintenance version, a medium maintenance version, and a high maintenance version. And you get to decide just what level of maintenance you want to do on your lawn. The point is, you get back a report that is very specific to each sample that you submitted and the plant codes that you put on each of those samples. At the same time, the first time you read one of these, it can be confusing. If you need help reading or understanding what the soil test report is trying to tell you, call 865-215-2340. This is the Knox County Extension Office. You might get a county agent. More likely, you'll get a message service. So leave a detailed message. And most of those calls are then handled by master gardeners who will listen to your message and then call you back and try to answer your question. So if you call this number, please leave a very detailed message so that the person who calls you back has a really good appreciation of what you're really asking. So that's it for taking and submitting your soil samples to be tested. Thank you for joining us today.